wife. So yes, Chris, it's pretty obvious you've been, the president of Keller Williams International. So it's a very large position. And so it's pretty obvious what you did running a global organization. Yes, you've sold over the past, is it 30 years already?
33.
33 years, your team still functions at a high level, even when you're generally not there, selling over 4,000 homes over the past 30 years in San Diego County. People know what that is. What people probably don't know, and if you can just give the 30 seconds, is what are you, Chief Real Estate Officer? That's your fancy title at Ojo?
Yeah, so
just tell people what Ojo is and what you do there.
Sure. We own Movoto.com. We meet millions of consumers every month on our portal. We're the 5th largest portal in the country. We introduce those consumers that need or should be introduced to real estate agents and mortgage professionals who help them with their real estate needs. As Eric said, actually, I was the president of Worldwide, CEO of Keller Williams, CEO of Mellow Home, but most importantly, I've been an agent. I actually got my license in 1983 and have a team that's been selling for 33 years. I haven't been running the team since 2010, but I still own it and still help them and talk to them on a regular basis. So that's my quick background.
Great, Chris. So that means, Chris, you're 76 years old and you look marvelous. I'm Eric Barron. I've been coaching, training, and consulting for agents and brokerages since the early 2000s. Since leaving executive leadership last summer, I am still spending about 15 to 20% of my time doing some coaching and training for agents, some consulting for brokerages, and launching a few other businesses that are coming very soon. So that's who we are. Once again, our information's in the chat. If we don't cover something in depth enough, email us. If you want to visit our LinkedIn's, it's early in the chat, all the way at the top. My website's there. So if you want any more information about what I'm doing, what Chris is doing, check out our LinkedIn profile. And we're happy to hear from you after today's session. So today's all about listings. We talked about this earlier when we first came on, try and shy away from the basics and the obvious. If we get into what some of you consider the obvious, like Chris said, it'll be a great refresher. But we're really going to try and focus on some of the nuances. And I want to just reinforce there's no right or wrong here. It's just, my opinion, having worked with more than 20,000 agents, and Chris's opinion, having led a global company and being on the street for many, many years. So just our opinion, there's no right or wrong. And let's kick it off. And the first word I want to mention is mindset. For many, it rings deep. For many, it's kind of a hokey word. Once again, being from New York and being that jaded New Yorker, you hear mindset, you're like, okay, sounds a little hokey, but I think, I know what mindset means to me. What does mindset mean to you, Chris?
It's super hard to be effective. It's super hard to be at an optimal level if you don't have a strong and positive mindset. And I don't hokey or smoky or whatever you want to call it. It is this the truth. 90% of the success that I had, in listing over 3,000 homes, on over 4,000 homes, was my mindset and how I walked into that appointment and how I walked out of that appointment. So I think it's really, really critical.
So, and I'm going to share 2 specific things. And if you want to add to this, we're going to go back and forth. It's going to be banter back and forth the next 45 minutes. So I'm going to share 2 specific things about mindset to me, what it means to me. And number 1, it is your mindset before you walk into the listing. Those 10 to 15 minutes before you walk into the listing appointment, as far as I'm concerned, is sacred time. And I've seen agents where it's like, I got to hang up now, I'm walking into a listing presentation. Like, that's not how you should walk into a listing presentation. Like any athlete, when they sit in the locker room before they go on the field, they map out the game plan. They close their eyes and they visualize what they want to happen from beginning, middle, and end. And sure, if there's a halftime like football, they probably do a reset. And that's what you should be doing, shutting out the noise, because there's more noise than ever, as we know, and really visualizing at least 10 minutes before you walk into that listing presentation, what you want to take place. That's one thing
I
that
would,
winds
I
up
would,
being.
I would take it even farther than that.
ahead.
I, I always made it a practice that the hour before, I didn't talk to anyone about anything. I didn't have anything scheduled, and I was completely focused. I knew before I got there two things: the price that I wanted to take the property at, and the price that I was going to walk out at, and I was going to list it somewhere in between there. And knowing those two prices ahead of time were key. As Eric said, mindset was the key. I mean, I listened to either music that made me happy or motivational tapes or whatever it took. And then I had my set of affirmations. And my last affirmation right before I knocked on the door was, it's showtime. And I had to remind myself of that because I learned early on that I had to, my personality style is very specific. And when I would meet with people that matched my personality style, the appointments went exceedingly well. Like, speaking the same language, we got it. I walk out in 20 minutes with a listing signed. I go to the next appointment and they had a different personality style than me. And it was like miscommunication and would go horrible. And I'd already call everyone at every appointment I didn't get and say, well, would you please tell me, what I could have done differently or why you chose to go in another direction? Please, you have my permission to be honest. I won't take anything personally. And they say, well, we didn't feel that you liked our house. We didn't feel that you were excited about our house or those things. And now I'm not that type of person. So I had to develop that flexibility and that versatility. And so that's why the last reminder was, it's showtime, knowing that I had to be whoever it was I was going to be meeting with, when that door opened.
Really interesting. Kind of leads me, something you said kind of triggered one of my future bullets here is customizing your listing presentation the best you can to your audience, right? The listing presentation is never about the agent. It's about providing the seller with the recipe and the information they need to make the proper decision for themselves and their family. So how crazy did you get in the nuances of customization? Question number one, Chris, and an adjacent question is, what did you do in the pre-listing to figure that out? And I have some tips around this too, but I'm curious to know what you did pre-listing to make sure that you're providing that seller in their home with what they need to make a decision.
Yeah, my goal was to know as much as possible before I got there. I viewed it very similar to a surgeon would before he got into the operating room, right? Surgeon doesn't show up, put on the gloves, walk in and say, oh, what are we doing today? Oh, removing a liver, great. No, they get prepared, right? They know everything that's going to be happening. So the listing appointment starts when you're setting the appointment, because that's an opportunity to start to set expectations. That's also the opportunity where we qualify, right? We ask questions to know and to establish if there's motivation. Now, a big mistake agents make all the time is they take those questions and then they try to either address them or handle the objections or do that stuff over the phone. That's not the purpose for asking the questions on when you're qualifying for an appointment. It's just to be prepared and know what you're going to be walking into. If someone says they want $3 million for their $2 million house, I'm not going to get into a debate with them over the phone. It's normal. Everyone wants more for their home. I just want to know where they stand so I know what I'm going to be working on. So that's the first step. And then the second step is when I'm calling to confirm the appointment. So I set the appointment today for next Tuesday. Monday I call them, say, hey, this is Chris, just calling to confirm our appointment tomorrow afternoon. Super excited to meet with you. Does that time still work? And by the way, did you get the information I sent over and did you have a chance to look at it? No, we haven't looked at it yet, Chris. But do me a favor, please take the time to look at it. Take you 10 or 15 minutes. Here's what it'll do. It'll prepare you for our appointment and allow us to spend our time talking about the things that are most important to you, because it's going to answer a lot of the other questions for you. Is that fair? Oh, that's fine. Great, Chris. So those are all the things that happen in preparation. So when I walk in, oh, let me back up one more thing. And I think you mentioned this, Eric, either before when we were talking or just a minute ago. I also, I use the DISC assessment. And I use it for myself. I use it for my team members, and we use it for our clients. And we want to know what personality style that person is based on their DISC, their DISC. And a lot of times, in fact, the majority of the time, you can determine that just in the conversations that you're having. So then we tailor when we're at the appointment, how we talk, the words we use, the amount of depth we go into or don't go into based on their personality style, so that it's as good a match as possible.
Okay, you covered probably 3 additional questions we were going to be talking about. Is there any nuance to your pre-listing call of what you definitely ask and what you don't ask?
Yeah, so
let me preface that by saying I've talked to a lot of agents over the years that their attitude is less is more, because they're afraid on that call. And you also mentioned something I was going to talk about, to send a pre-listing package or not. So the agent is afraid on that call, or what they may or may not include in that pre-listing package is going to unnecessarily open up a can of worms that they'd rather address in someone's living room. So any nuance to those 2 things that you've done and why you've done it?
Yeah, and I just want to address the fear thing that you brought up. One of my early mentors used to tell me all the time, Chris, you can't lose what you don't have. So don't be worried about it. Don't be fearful about it, right? You don't have the listing anyway, so you can't lose it if you don't have it. And I know that any decisions that are made that are fear-based decisions are always the wrong ones anyway. So if you have those fears or concerns, throw them away. The nuances are when we're setting the appointment, actually before we set the appointment. So I'm talking to someone, an expired listing, a referral, whoever it is, and we're going to set the time. I'll say, hey, do you have a couple more minutes for me to ask you some questions so we can be prepared for when we meet? And they'll say, sure. All right. And I'm going to go through the basic questions. Where are they moving? When do they need to be there? How much do they want to list their property for? Are they interviewing other agents? Have
Okay,
they?
but Chris, aren't you supposed to tell me how much I should be listing my property for?
Eric, as a professional, I study homes and values every day. Therefore, I assume when we meet, you'll want to list your home for the price that'll cause it to sell, correct?
Correct.
Great. So I have a script for.
No, but that's important, because here's what I want to say. And it's funny how we just keep talking and it keeps going to my bullet points. I hate when agents have always said to me, I hate scripts, or I don't use scripts. And my response is, you use scripts every single day. You use the same script to get your kid to do their homework. So whether you like it or not, your life is filled with scripts. So why not embrace it, internalize it like you just did, so it just flows off your tongue and you don't need to think. And if you don't need to think, you can actually listen and pay attention to the other side. So
here's the funny thing about that. As I mentioned earlier, I stepped out of running my team in 2010. So it's been 12 years. Been over 12 years since I've been on an appointment, qualified appointment, or anything else. That script I haven't said in over 10 years. And it was there. But everyone to your point, everyone uses scripts. Every professional does. Doctors. I fly a lot, and I'm one of the first people on the plane when I fly, because I fly so much. And every time I get on the plane, the pilots are up there in the cockpit going through their scripts, going through their checklists every flight. And
it's the same, and it's consistent.
Yes. And if we want to be professionals, and the fact that you all are here is evidence that you want to or are, then we need to operate that same way.
Any additional nuance to address the fears of the pre-listing? Let's talk. Everyone does a pre-listing call, right? And that's great. We just gave an example of something specifically you ask, and then my objection to it, and then the rebuttal. That was fabulous. And once again, I'm going to say this again for a lot of people that have joined in the past few minutes. We're covering things at a very light level because we want to cover a lot. So if you have specific questions of us, we put our contact information and emails and LinkedIn profiles in the chat. Please feel free to reach out to us after today's session.
Yeah. We'll give that at the end also for the people that can't see it in the chat.
But I know there's a lot of people on this call, because I've talked to a lot of agents, particularly in the tri-state area, that, I don't send a pre-listing package. That potentially
here was one of my primary goals, was to differentiate myself. So I wanted to be the most professional. I joked about this earlier. Eric and I got on about 10 minutes earlier, and we had the Zoom opened up so anyone could join in. And there were some people that were here 10 minutes early. And that was one of my points of differentiation. I got to every appointment 5 to 10 minutes early. And I knew I was early enough or early when I could hear them vacuuming when I came up to the front door, because they always vacuum right before you get there. And I did that for 2 reasons. Number one, I knew most agents would be late because agents are just late. And I didn't want to be like most of the agents. The other reason I would do that, especially if I knew, by the way, if you guys if you don't have a question, if you could mute yourselves.
I was just going to say that if you could please mute, we'd greatly appreciate it.
I would only get there early, especially if they were interviewing agents. And if they were interviewing someone right before me, I would always get there early. And there was nothing more fun for me to knock on the door while an agent was in their kitchen and they answer the door and say, well, oh, Chris, you're early. We're still here meeting with the other agent. And I'd always say, oh, no problem. I'll wait in the living room. I'd walk in and watch the agent lose their mind and lose the opportunity to list the house and walk out. But those were 2 things, ways to differentiate ourselves. So pre-listing packet, if you do it well and it's professional, and it doesn't have to be overkill, just the basics information is a way to be professional, differentiate yourself. And the other reason I wanted to do is I was really focused on the amount of time I was spending, my efficiency and my effectiveness of my whole day, including my appointments. And I didn't want to spend any more time than necessary there. So if I could get them as much information ahead of time that I wouldn't have to address, or I could refer back to and say, you know what, that was in the information that I gave you. When we're done, happy to review it with you. And most of the time they'd forget or they wouldn't want to, or I'd say, hey, after I leave, you can go ahead and review that.
Did you include comps?
I tried it both ways. The majority of the time I did not, because for the simple reason is people that aren't trained in what we do don't often interpret them correctly. In fact, they 9 times out of 10 will misinterpret them. So I didn't do that because I knew that chances are they would misinterpret what they were looking for, and I wanted to be able to go through that with them.
One last thing about the pre-listing, and this maybe predates you. I'm just curious if your team does it today. Do you send a video before you show up? A video message to them? Do you know if your team does?
So in 2009 and 10, when I stopped doing this, we weren't using video.
Right.
And it's so funny. A lot of my appointments were before the internet too.
Of course.
But yes, my team does a video. In fact, they do a video right after the appointment set and say, hey, this is Chris. It was great speaking with you. Super excited to meet with you next Tuesday. I just wanted to put a face with a name. We'll be sending you some information, as I mentioned. Please take a look at it. And then we send another one right before we go.
And is it overkill? Once again, we're not here to say what's right or wrong or what's this. You have to adapt these things that are part of who you are and your brand and your style. I wasn't thinking about the video after the appointment was set, right? That's great. I'm also a big fan of sending a video about an hour before, hey, Stan and Samantha, look forward to seeing you in an hour, and really kind of digging in about how we're going to maximize the value of your home, right? Kind of planting that seed, because that's what they want to hear. So how are you going to maximize the value of my home? And it just gets them excited. And in a way, you could also, if you want, send a video a half hour after the listing appointment, reinforcing 1 or 2 things.
Absolutely.
And those details, when we'll talk about this a couple of times today about show versus tell. Many agents simply tell, but they don't show. And one way to show is by your actions. How I'm on point and how I use video a lot, because you're communicating with them via video, and or showing them via stories. You can't just say, I'm this, without giving a for example. And we'll get into that in a little bit. So
there's one other point of differentiation, Eric, in the, the pre-listing and in that is it gives you an opportunity to again set expectations. So in the confirmation call, as you're setting the appointment, you can let him know. And the last point on our pre-qualification is, just so you know, our appointment's going to take 15 to 20 minutes. We're setting that.
There's not an agent listening right now that is not spending at least an hour or 2 hours in someone's apartment.
Yeah. And people don't.
So when someone says to you, Chris, impossible, there's no way you're there for 20 minutes.
Our listing presentation is 20 minutes long.
But how about if someone wants more?
We'll spend, there's been appointments where I in my head have said to myself several times, I'm not leaving. I'm going to sit here. I'm not leaving without this listing. I had an appointment, and I remember this vividly. This is a long time ago. The wife got up from the table. At some point, he got up from the table. I'm just sitting there, and I'm thinking, I'm not leaving. I'm not getting out of this chair. And I kept going, and eventually he came back to the table. Eventually she came back to the table, and this kept going. And they were, oh, we want to think about it. We need to think about it. And finally I said, and it was a Friday. It was a Friday afternoon at the end of the day. And I said, it sounds like there's two options. One is you guys can take your Friday night and talk about if you want to hire me or who you're going to hire and talk about all this stuff. Or we can choose to list it right now. And you can spend your Friday night with a bottle of wine and a movie and have fun. And she looked at him and said, I like his idea. Boom, done. But that was like after an hour and a half. So, but yeah, the presentation itself shouldn't, people don't, how many of you, like salespeople, coming in your home and sitting in your kitchen or your living room for 2 hours? I know I don't. That's not what people want. They want to hear what they want to hear, and get their questions answered. And then our job is to help them make a great decision.
And use it earlier. I use it a lot as it relates to mindset, the doctor mentality. People in your own way, once again, these are all nuances, want to be told what to do. They want to be told what's going to happen. They want to see your level of confidence when the doctor says, here's what's going to happen. And we all know doctors spend less than 10 minutes with us today, right? We spend more time with their PA and everybody else than we do with the actual doctor. But if that doctor comes in and in 7 minutes reinforces what I want to hear, here's what's going to happen, I'm like, oh, I like them.
Well, and you bring up a really good point. I use this same analogy a lot. The whole idea of being confident when you walk in, that firm handshake, looking them in the eye, a big smile, and being confident. You walk into a doctor, and if they give you a wet noodle handshake and they don't look you in the eye and they're, sort of humdrum, I don't know about you, but I'm like, I want to get out of there. I'm looking for a second opinion. If that doctor is, has that confidence, that's what I want as a patient. That's what I want. That's what we want as consumers when we're talking to someone who we're thinking about hiring to do a job. So all those things are really important, and they are making decisions and judging you, from the first conversation on the phone to the time that you get there. And we have to be conscious of that and make the most of that.
You said something also, again, one of my bullet points here, and these are little nuances of sitting at the table. Yeah.
I had a practice.
Let me just say, because once again, this is a business meeting. Sure, they want to like you, and there's a personal connection. And the more they like you personally, the more likely they are to work with you. But this is still the more you can create some of those boundaries, that this is a business conversation. I am going to be your fiduciary. My fiduciary responsibility is to maximize the value of your asset, is to protect your equity that you spent 9 years working on and building. And I think, I think we agree on this, sitting at the table, setting that tone is a lot better than leaning back, right? Versus leaning forward and sitting on a couch.
Yeah, here's the other thing. Here's the other reason that I would only sit at the table or the counter, is I wanted a surface that they could sign on. And that wasn't going to happen in the living room or on the couch. So I had a practice. Came in, hey, great to meet you. Excited about talking about the opportunity of getting your home sold for you. Before we get started, do you mind if I go take a quick look at the home? And I would want to do that, and I'd want to do that without them. Why? If I do that with them, they're going to point out things and they don't know what to do, and it's awkward, and they think they're supposed to try to sell me on their home or tell me about the heavy duty shelving paper they put on the closet shelves and those type of things. I don't need to hear any of those things. And I'll even say this, oh, well, let us show you around. I say, let me walk through myself and look at your home through the eyes of a buyer. And then when I come back, I'll if there's any suggestions or questions I have, we'll ask that. And I'll meet you in the kitchen. I'd go do that. Number one, it saved a lot of time. Number two, it allowed me uninterrupted to be focused and really look at the house. And then when I come back, they'd say, hey, you want to sit here on the couch or in the living room? I said, you know what, can we sit at the table or the dining room table, kitchen table, counter, one of those areas. And then the other thing I do, they'd often say, can I get you anything? And normally we always do the polite thing. I'll say, no, I'm fine. I would always say yes. A glass of water would be fantastic. And if they didn't ask me, I'd say, hey, do you have some water? And I wanted them, number one, I was often thirsty because I drink a lot of water. But number two, I wanted them to get used to doing what I was asking them to do. And you said you had the distinction, Eric, of showing versus telling. Again, one of the things my early mentor used to say is selling is not telling. Selling is asking questions. So my presentation was just a series of questions, and the answers to those questions led them down the path that I wanted them to go down. Too many times agents get in and just start talking. Remember, using Eric's doctor analogy, doctor doesn't come in and start just talking. Doctor comes in and starts asking questions. Oh, I missed out on one other thing I want to get back to before. The nuance ahead of time. The most important thing we can do before the appointment is to find out what their motivation is. Because in the appointment and in the presentation, we're going to keep going to that motivation, right? They're not going to want to list their home at the right price versus what they want if we don't keep reminding them about what that's going to allow them to do, or where that's going to get them, or where they're going to be if they're successful. We have to keep pointing them to their motivation to get beyond the discomfort of pricing it right or paying our fee or whatever the other challenges are.
That water thing is brilliant. Because you're going to get an easy yes, no problem. And you're subconsciously or consciously training them to say yes. That is a brilliant nuance. God, you just mentioned things that I want to we'll pivot to real quick, because I have a note here, when I talk to agents and I work with agents about words are powerful. The questions you ask are powerful. And everything should only do one of two things: feed their motivations or calm their fears.
Yeah.
And if you have other superfluous stuff in your presentation, you need to think about that now and remove the unnecessary filler. And maybe your listing appointments won't be 2 hours and you can get the listing agreement signed in 45 minutes. Could we just talk about some of your favorite things in regards to feeding motivations and calming fears?
Yeah, I would, I would see agents walk into appointments or out of appointments with a stack of marketing stuff, like literally like 6 inches of stuff that they probably spent 2 hours.
Well, hopefully today they're walking in with a small package and an iPad.
But that iPad may have like 59 slides. Sure. And long explain. Mine was very condensed and focused. And they would and questions like about marketing, right? If they didn't have questions about marketing, I wasn't going to spend a whole lot of time talking about it, right? Because it wasn't obviously important to them. And if they did, I would always ask the question, what's your definition of marketing? So first says, what do you do for marketing? An agent could spend 30 minutes. I do this, and then we do that, and then we do this. And I'll say, well, what's your definition of marketing? Well, do you do open houses? So really their question was, do you do open houses? Not, what's your marketing? And so then we talk about whether we do or don't do open houses. And then I'd go on to the next topic or get into pricing or whatever it is. There's a great question in the chat about what questions you ask about their home.
Yeah,
So during their qualification, the questions I asked about their
hold on
home
one
is,
second, please mute your microphone. Please, everyone. Thank you.
During the qualifications questions, I asked, hey, will you please quickly describe your home? And it's the key is quickly, right? And they'll say a few things, and like we already know all the details, right? We know the bedrooms, bath size, all those things. But I want to hear what things they mentioned that that are important to them or that they think is important. And then I'll say, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the condition of your home? And they'll say whatever they say and it's rarely a 10. But the next question is, what would make it a 10? I'll say, well, we the carpet probably needs to be replaced, or, we need to do some touch-up paint, or, we have this issue or whatever it is. So that gave me all the information I needed, and allowed me to have solutions for when I was at the appointment for all those things that needed to be done. So those are the type of questions I'd ask about the home.
Sorry, I'm not a great host, so I tried to mute everybody. We are going to get, so I have a question, because we're going to get to the questions in the chat as well, if we can. So you don't tour the home with them?
No. Did you mute me too, or can you hear me?
I could hear you.
Okay.
But no, that's quick, because I want to share. I think everyone gets why, but you don't tour. I want to make sure what I heard you don't tour the home with them.
No, I don't want. Here's what happens: the more they talk about the home, the higher the value and the price goes in their mind. And I'm not there for them to sell me on the value of their home. I'm there to explain to them and educate them on what they need to do to be successful in pricing their home to sell.
And it's funny. And once again, no right or wrong here. I take a little bit of a different approach. You shouldn't force to tour the home with them. And I hate when agents have that as their de facto strategy. Yeah. However, if we know the personality beforehand and someone had a question about this, like what are the things you potentially ask in your pre-listing phone call and so forth to help better narrow down their personality style. And I don't want to go too deep into that because, right, you've been teaching this. But I have a question for you, because I want to just talk about the tour. If I know I have a high I who's extremely loquacious and animated and loves to tell stories and speak, I'm going to give them room to share some stories about walking around, because my attitude is the more they talk, the more about themselves or their home, the more they like me. So I'm not going to force it on a high D who's just how quick, how fast, how much, but with a high I am going to feed that. And I'm going to sit through some of those stories.
Here's how I handle that. I would come back from looking at the home, and we'd they give me my water, we sit down, and I would bring up things that blew their mind that I recognized or that I noticed. And it might be, the elephant lamp they had in the second bedroom, and say, you had that super interesting lamp in that bedroom. Where did that come from? And then, that was on our trip to India and la, la, la. And that's all I needed to do was a couple of those things. Also a question that's relevant to that is, did you ever point out potential problems that come up during a home inspection? So when I came back from going through the property, I'd say, hey, the house looks great. You guys done a great job. There are some recommendations I have. When we're done today, I'm going to go through those recommendations of things that might be able to help you get the home sold more and or for more money. And then I would absolutely do that. And people appreciated that and they wanted to hear that. And good, bad, or ugly. That's one of the things that I also want to hit on. We always have to tell them the truth. I remember going into a house in the garage, they had a litter of German Shepherd puppies. And then the big German Shepherd parent was in the house. And this was a house that had been on the market, hadn't sold. And near the end, I said, one of the things we need to do is your home has a very strong pet odor. and we need to do something about that. And here's some suggestions. And she was horrified. She said, why didn't my last agent tell me that? I'm horrified. I had all these people coming through my house and no one told me. And she was so so grateful that I told her the truth, and kind of angry that the last agent didn't. So, we always want to point out those things and say, hey, there's quite a few cobwebs on your dining room chandelier, and, people notice those things that we notice in our home, things we don't notice in our home, the nicks in the walls, the dents in the doors, because we live here every day. But when a buyer comes in your home, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, their eyes are automatically going to be drawn to any imperfection. So I want you to go through and look at your home through a fresh set of eyes, and any imperfections you see, it's important to touch those up and take care of those.
When I talk about nuances, and you just talked about some of them, one of my favorite nuances is doorknobs. Why doorknobs? Because every buyer is going to be touching every doorknob. And that physical consistency or it's the nuances, it's the attention to details that are, when a buyer walks out and they go, I like that home. And it could simply be, you've replaced doorknobs and it's one of the least expensive things to replace in your home.
Can I answer another question? It's in the chat, Eric.
Yeah, please.
These are sort of related. It says, do you ever point out potential problems to come up during a home inspection? And is it reasonable to ask about roof boiler X condition?
Can we not spend can I just ask you a favor? Because we have a ton of people here that do condos and co-ops and that doesn't come up. So if you could answer that quickly, I would appreciate it.
My answer is you address those things after you've listed it. When you're doing the disclosures, you have those conversations.
Got it. Anything else we want to add? Because I'm so obsessed about less is more and really fine tuning your script around feeding the motivation and calming the fears. Is there anything that you have done and nuances as it relates to those two things? Besides, once again, the obvious, constantly reminding them, if we do this, this, and this, you'll be in Florida by June. Yeah. Right. Those are the obvious things.
So let's talk about the fears part. And the fear parts show up a lot of different ways. They'll ask you questions. And remind me, before I want to talk about questions versus objections.
Yep, we'll go there in a second. Yep.
But they'll say stuff like, what's an example? We don't want a lockbox on the house.
No lock boxes in condos and co-ops.
Okay. We only want these type of showings or these showings at this time, or whatever it is.
No, that's great. Limited showings. I'm busy. I have kids. They make it impossible to gain access. Yes.
What's important is when people say things, or they'll say, I don't know, there could be a million examples. What's important to ask them is, what's your concern about that? And then you'll really get to the issue. I remember a specific, for those of you that don't use lock boxes, California, every house has a lockbox on. People say, hey, I don't, this couple said, we don't want a lockbox. I said, well, what's your concern? And here's why I asked, because in California, when every other house is on a lockbox, an agent can just call first and then go show the house, and then you have one that isn't, that house is going to get less showings because the agents are going to take the path of least resistance and go show the ones that are easiest to show. And they said, well, we sold a house several years ago and someone walked in on us when one of us was in the shower. I said, oh my gosh, that's horrible. So can I give you a solution for that? I'll have my handyman install a slide lock on your front door. So no one gets in with or without the lockbox unless you unslide that. Now you just have to promise me whenever you leave for a showing, you make sure you unslide that. But I gave them a solution. The lockbox was not the issue. The issue was making sure that people weren't walking in on them. So we have to ask, what's your concern about that when they express
it? Honestly, I want people, that should be right here all the time. What's your concern about that? Because typically, here we go again. This almost feeds us into, because I love this stuff, is objections versus questions. Yeah. And there are so many questions that you could simply give a yes or no answer to, versus going into defensive mode, right? As a lot of agents do, and figuring out, oh my God, what's my rebuttal?
Yeah, and which is a really ineffective way to handle things. So the most important thing we can do is distinguish whether something's a question or an objection.
Mm.
Because what do we do with questions? We answer them. What do we do with objections? We handle them. What a lot of agents do is they get a question and they handle it. Example, well, here's the favorite one. Will you take a lower commission, or will you, and I'll see agents go into a 20 or 30 minute, rant on why they can't, and their expenses and the taxes they have to pay and the split with their broker and and on and on and on. And, here's what we need to do. And all those things. And all the seller asked was simply, will you take a lower commission? So when someone asked me a question, I had to practice, answer their question. No. Any other questions? And they say, no, I think that's it. Or they say, well, so if it persisted, then it became an objection. And then I would appropriately handle whatever that objection was. But answer questions and then handle objections. Don't handle questions.
Love that. Absolutely love that. Do you have a favorite objection that is pretty commonplace and a unique approach to that rebuttal, and a unique rebuttal, I should say? And I'm sorry, I'm just reading my notes, getting a little distracted here. So a common objection and a unique response, if you have one top of mind. And what's your thoughts on walking in with a listing agreement completely filled out, full commission, knowing that you're going to get that listing agreement signed today, and what the potential biggest, we can start there, and what the biggest objection
that's an easy one. Every appointment we walk into, the agreement is completely filled out, other than the start date and their signatures, right? All the other.
Chris, I can't sign that today. I have to meet with at least one or two other agents.
Yeah. All right, I'll handle that one. Then I'll answer the one you asked.
Go.
Eric, I can appreciate that. Let me ask you a question. What do you hope to gain or learn by meeting with multiple agents? And
I just want to ensure that we're not missing anything as it relates to price, differentiation. I like you, Chris. Just let us meet with one or two more agents.
Okay, that's fair. Eric, one of the reasons people hire me more often than anyone else is for my ability to help people make decisions. You see, at some point during the process, there's going to be a buyer and their agent in your living room, and they're going to be deciding on whether they should make an offer on your home or another home. And you're going to want an agent like me who can help them make the decision to buy your home, aren't you?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, of course you are. So let me do that now and help you make a good decision. Eric, do you feel I could sell your home?
I do.
Okay. Now, based on what we talked about, and I know that, initially you wanted to price it here, but after we looked at the comps and we really talked about the market and what's going on, do you agree that the price that we've discussed is the right price to list it at?
I obviously like to get a little bit more, but for what you shared with me, I can understand, but I'd still like to get a little bit more, Chris, than what you're recommending.
All right. So and if the market allows us to do that, we will do that. The more it sells for, the better for both of us, right? And so we'll do everything we can to maximize that. You feel I could sell the home? Wait, was that the first question I asked you?
It is.
Okay. Just blank. We've agreed that this is the right price. Eric, is there really anything else that any other agent or anyone else could say that's more important than those two issues?
How difficult do you want me to make this? I don't know what I don't know, Chris.
I'm not going to quit. So, but
I know. We don't have to go there, right? Yes, but wait, hey, here's the bottom line. It's your systematic style of asking good questions, digging a little bit deeper. And as you're not just asking questions, you're also proving your value of how you would potentially negotiate a deal.
They're judging us all the time on those things, right? And if they're not, and if I don't think they're catching that, I'm going to point that out. I'm going to say, this is right now is an example of why you should hire me. because I'm sharing with you and giving you an example of how I'm going to work when it comes to negotiating the best price for your home or the highest dollar. Someone asked the question, do you give them your price recommendation at the listing presentation, or do you come back with comps? I had one single goal: to walk into an appointment and walk out with a listing. So I was doing everything right there. I knew if I left, chances are I wasn't going to get it later. And, you know, another good agent, if they came in behind me, would take that listing. So I'm a strong believer in the one and done approach.
You know, it's funny. I just want to give a quick tip that has worked well with, you know, some scenarios, right? Not every tip works in every scenario. And that's why you need to be adaptable as an agent and listen to what people's motivations and fears are. I try and separate myself, you know, when I talk to agents, I try and convince them to separate themselves of a you against me, right? We're on the same side. And your goal is to actually think like the buyers. I'm curious to know, it's not about, I'd love to break records in this building. It's a win-win. That being said, I want to share with you how buyers are going to look at your home and potentially other apartments they may or may not compare you to. And I'd love your opinion about where you fit. So I try and always, you know, talk to agents about deflecting it about my opinion, right? As an agent, which is important, right? Because you are the doctor, but your opinion based on what, right? So if it's your opinion based upon buyer mentality, then they can't go, oh, you, Eric, want to price my home low. It's, you know, the methodology behind the madness. There we go again. Show versus tell, right? You're going to tell them you're doing something when you're going to show them with a story about how you came up with this price based upon how buyers are going to judge your home based upon other things on the market. And we also know that could change daily when a new listing comes to market.
Yeah. Totally agree. Someone asked the question, how can you give them a price if you haven't seen the apartment yet? I viewed it as my job was to know more about the market than they do. And that means that I did research. You know, I would look at everything that had sold. I would look at everything that was for sale. I would, because I was so active, I knew about properties. I knew.
I'm assuming you previewed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of homes as well.
Yes, constantly. I studied back then our MLS, the daily update was called the hot sheet. That was the first thing I did at 7 o'clock every morning and 6:30 every morning was print out the hot sheet of all the previous day's activities and looked at every new listing, everything that went pending, everything that closed, everything that had a price reduction. And I would see that. And 3 weeks later, I'd see the ones that had come on the market that had sold really quick or the ones that already had price reductions. And you just really start to get to learn the values in the market.
But in fairness to that question, you probably went in with a tight range and then fine-tuned your pricing, obviously.
Oftentimes, you know, what you thought you're walking into and what you walk into are two different things. So you make adjustments on the fly, but you make educated adjustments because you've done your homework.
Okay, we have 7 minutes. We said 9:45, but we'll go another 7 minutes and we'll have a hard out here at 10 o'clock. And a super thank you to everyone that's taken an hour to spend time with us. Super appreciative. I'm hoping Chris and I, you know, want to deliver value, and we really hope you took away 3, 4, 5 things from today to begin implementing right away, and or think about, holy shit, I have some work to do. You know, even if you've been doing it 20 years. And once again, I put our information in there again. If you want to put your email in there again, Chris, I didn't know it offhand, but I put all of our contact information in there. So if you want to reach out to myself or Chris, we would love to hear from you. Okay, some last rapid fire here.
Hey, before you, while you're looking at that,
go.
Someone asked if we're going to send out the recording, and I said yes. So that's easy for me to make that promise because I'm not doing it. But I assume you're going to be able to send a recording to everyone who registered.
Do I have a choice now?
No.
And it's funny, I typically don't say that right in the invite, because once again, we'll probably lose 30 people and go, oh, they'll find a reason not to show up today. So I guess since somebody asked it, we will do that. Any last thoughts that we haven't spoken about from rapid fire that's been on your head, or maybe we provoked today?
Yeah, we touched on mindset earlier, but really having that mindset that you're there to take the listing. Yeah, you're not there to make a friend. You're not there to spend time. You're there. And I really truly walked in with the thought that I'm not leaving without the listing. And I was prepared. Here's one thing we haven't talked about.
Okay.
12 years later, 13 years later, I can handle any objection, even though I haven't done it for 13 years, because I practiced and role played and wrote out and practiced and role played and wrote out my objection handlers tens of thousands of times. I was actively selling and listing homes for 26, 27 years. And I practiced every day that I worked, I practiced and did my listing presentation and recorded it. I remember when we moved offices several years ago, I think it was 2004, because we changed companies, and my team had boxes and boxes of cassette tapes. And these cassette tapes were recordings of my listing presentation. And I would walk into a listing presentation, say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I have a coach. And one of the things that my coach has tasked me with doing is to record myself on my presentations, because I am committed to being the best possible agent. And he's asked me to record this presentation so he can evaluate what I do and how I say it. Are you okay with that? And 9 times out of 10, they'd say, yeah, whatever, we don't care. And if they had an issue, I'd put it away.
Good.
But those listening to yourself is truly the most painful thing I've done, and I've done it so many times, not because I'm on the torture plan, because I was so maniacal about getting better and figuring out why what I did didn't work. But it's, we have to operate at that level if we want the results. If we want extraordinary results, we can't be ordinary in how we approach things. And that's the long.
What you just said is what a lot of agents that I coach get frustrated with me, because they want brilliant ideas, right? And I often go back to it, I'll use a sports analogy again, just great blocking and tackling. If you can't master blocking and tackling, how can we talk about scheme and game plan? And one of the things you just talked about, because that's how I even studied in school, I wrote out everything. And the more sense of your senses you can engage, right? Your 5 senses, verbal, visual, looking at yourself, if you're okay putting yourself on camera, because that's really important. I can only imagine when we get objections, the faces we make and they see it right away, right? Because there are so many trigger objections, and then we make those faces, and it has an effect on our seller, whether we like it or not. So just what you just said is, some people might go, oh, that's so mundane and so obvious, but 9 out of 10 agents don't do it in repetition. And then I ask an agent, oh, it's great if you go on listing presentations every day, and if you go on listing presentations every week. But if there are agents that go on a couple of listing presentations each month, you can't possibly be on your game, right? You said this earlier. I said, we used the doctor analogy. Doctors do surgery 8 times a day.
Yeah. And here's the other thing. You don't want to use your presentations as practice, right? That's the game. You practice before the game, not during the game. But we look at when you really know what to say and what to do, you don't have to be thinking in your head while they're talking, what am I going to say next? Or how am I going to handle that? And when that happens, you're not present, and they can feel it, see it. And that's not going to instill confidence.
Okay. Last minute, if they walk away with only 1 or 2 things today, what do you want them to remember?
Don't wing it. Have a presentation, practice it, present it. My very first listing appointment was with my brother's sister-in-law and brother-in-law. It was a relative. I'm new in the business. My very first appointment. For a week and a half ahead of time, I would grab any agent I could in the office and say, hey, can I practice on you? Can I role play on you? And that was for my first appointment with a relative who did not list with me, who hired someone else. But from that day on, I was like, I have to be really good at this presentation. So don't wing it. Have a presentation, learn it, internalize it, practice it, and then fine tune it as you see what's working and what's not working.
Okay. Last thought I'll leave people with is, you need 4 to 5 great stories that justify your claims. And what I like to say is, you're going to have a timeline. and you're going to share this timeline with them. And you're probably going to introduce some speed bumps along the way, and why they're never going to feel those speed bumps because they've hired you. And I think it's really, really important that you have a potential story at each stage to show them your value versus tell them your value. And the more specific you can be, and this has been studied, specific equals credible. The more general statements you make, it's not going to hit home and make that lasting impression on them where they have the confidence to hire you. So work on those stories. Work on those stories that can show them how you created this type of bidding war and what it means to be in best and final, and how, frankly, they're going to win.
Yeah.
That's my last comment. Any last thought?
No, it's a great point. Third-party endorsements are much better than us endorsing ourselves. Third-party stories are much more impactful than us telling someone something.
Chris, I've known you 15 years. I love you. We should do this daily.
We should definitely do it again.
We could, right? I mean, we could 8:30 to 9 o'clock every morning. We are both super appreciative to people spending an hour with us. That's not lost on us. You could be doing a million other things. Truly hope you got value. Our information's in the chat. Please reach out to us. Have an amazing week. Have an amazing Tuesday. And Chris, thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate
Thanks,
you all.
everybody. See you soon. Okay.